Hello, everybody, and welcome to the last episode of the semester of On Screen. I'm your host, Dylan Wright, and I'm here to take you on a journey through film and television. So this will be the very last episode of the semester, and I just want to thank you all for listening and tuning in every week to listen to me ramble on about movies and television. I really appreciate it, and I hope you guys will continue to listen when I come back come January when the new semester starts up. It's December, and with December comes a new Star Wars movie, Rogue One. It's going to be the first of what's being called the Star Wars Anthology, which are basically just prequel movies spaced in between the main series of movies. So for this week's topic, I want to talk about just Star Wars movies in general. I know that I've always been a huge Star Wars fan ever since I could remember. I vividly recall sitting down and watching the original trilogy on VHS, the silver VHS tapes. They captured my imagination. They were just so vivid and so just exciting for me to watch. And every time I still watch them, I get really excited. And I remember going to see the prequel trilogy in the theaters. I saw Phantom Menace, Attack of the Clones, and Revenge of the Sith all in theaters as an excited Star Wars fan. I loved them when they came out. I realized later on that they weren't as solid as I remember them, but that's just kind of part of growing up. You realize that the things that you really love aren't as great as you thought they were, even though the original trilogy still is great and the prequel trilogy still isn't that great. And when it was announced that Disney had bought the rights to Star Wars and that a new Star Wars movie was coming into theaters, I was really excited. I was so enthusiastic to go back into the theaters and watch a brand new Star Wars movie coming onto the big screen. I was worried, of course, hoping that it wasn't going to be another prequel trilogy situation. When I saw that, I got this feeling in my gut that I never get when I watch movies anymore. I got this feeling of joy, this really deep, visceral feeling of just elation, of excitement for seeing this new movie, this universe that I've loved so much and devoured constantly, just being brought onto the big screen again. And I was just taken back, right back to my childhood watching those VHS tapes. I was so excited to see that Star Wars was back for real. And I'm hoping that each of the movies that are coming out are going to keep matching that expectation. I'm going to try to temper my excitement to make sure that if it is disappointing, I don't really kill myself because of that. But I'm really looking forward to the new movies that are coming out. I'm especially excited for Episode 8. Rogue One, I saw the trailer and I was on board. And I hope it's really good. But today, I want to kind of talk about what went wrong with the prequel trilogy, that it didn't really live up to the original trilogy. Like, why was that the case? I can give you one reason that kind of encapsulates every other reason that somebody could say went wrong with the prequel trilogy, and that is George Lucas. If you aren't aware of who this man is, George Lucas is the creator of Star Wars, for all intents and purposes. He wrote the script and directed the first Star Wars movie, A New Hope. He had story input on Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi, and for the prequel trilogy, he wrote and directed all three of those. Basically, with the very first Star Wars movie that came out, George Lucas had several drafts that he went through in making what became known as Star Wars. You know, there was really overly complicated plots and so many more characters than ended up being in the movie. And a lot of that had to do with the studio kind of being confused by it. He brought in some of his collaborators, Gloria Katz and Willard Huyck, to help him revise the script. There are also stories that his wife at the time, editor Marcia Griffin, also had some input in the story and kind of helped shape it as well. So there was a lot of hands kind of in the pot helping shape Star Wars into what it should be, you know, simplifying things, trimming things down, stuff like that. And when he directed and wrote Star Wars, afterwards he was like, that was a tough project to work through. I was deadly tired at the end of it. I didn't really enjoy myself doing that. So I'm going to hand over the directing reins to somebody else, and I'm just going to work on story and script and work with a bunch of other people with that as well. So he did that, and then he did that again for Return of the Jedi. After that, he was like, okay, that's going to be the end of it. And then some 20 years later, it was announced that he was going to make a prequel trilogy. And all Star Wars fans around the world rejoiced. They would get to see the birth of Darth Vader, the birth of the Empire, how things got to be the way they were when we first hopped in on Star Wars, or as it was now called, A New Hope. It ended up not being what everybody wanted it to be. Instead of being this just amazing space war between a tyrannical empire and a ragtag group of rebels, it was a series about trade disputes and a religious sect that also has some science involved in it that makes them magical, and a whiny kid who is just super good at pod racing, but then becomes a whiny, creepy teenager who basically stalks someone until they, Stockholm Syndrome, fall in love with them. And people around the world were shocked that the prequel trilogy was not as good as the original trilogy. And a lot of that blame can be placed on the shoulders of George Lucas, and here's why. With the original trilogy, George Lucas had several people, the studio, his wife, several collaborators that were able to temper his vision and hone it in to be something that's really powerful and simple and easy for anybody to jump into. With the prequel trilogy, the studio thought, you know what, this guy knows what he's doing. We're going to give him free creative reign. He's going to be able to do what he wants without our input or our intervention. And it ended up not being as good as everybody wanted it to be, because without somebody to hone George in to what should be done, it didn't end up well. It didn't work out. George Lucas is not an actor's director. He doesn't really know how to write dialogue that people normally would say. If you listen to any piece of dialogue within any of the prequel trilogies, and you said that to somebody in real life, it would sound like nonsense. Whereas if you look at some of the dialogue in Empire Strikes Back, people would say some of that stuff. That would be something that would casually come up in this kind of universe. It's not overly pomp and circumstance and really formal. It's casual. And with the prequel trilogy, it was just really stiff and literal. Most people said out loud what they were feeling instead of just emoting it like most actors normally do. And a lot of that could be put on George Lucas's shoulders because he's the director. He tells the actors what to do and what not to do. He's obviously a very big believer of tell, don't show, when it should be show, don't tell. The scenes where he does show are really powerful and really, they kind of remind you of what was so great about the original trilogy. But they're buried by these constant, I love you, but we can't be together, verbal conversations. They just get old by the end of it. You're sick of hearing it, and you really don't want them to get together because they just annoyed you with all their talk about forbidden love. There's more ways to do it than just saying it out loud every 5 minutes. A lot of the problems of the prequel trilogy are pacing problems and boring just parts that really don't have anything to do with the overarching plot. In Phantom Menace, there's no real protagonist. We don't have a character that we relate to and follow. We have just several characters that are just kind of spread out throughout the movie that we have to just suddenly find ourselves involved with. It's not like the original trilogy where we had Luke Skywalker as our audience surrogate, where he was being introduced to this world and just like as wide-eyed as we were. And with The Force Awakens, we have that with Rey and Finn, and they're able to be us in this new universe that feels lived in. And the prequel trilogy suffers from not having that kind of grounding that the original trilogy had. Big problem is that George Lucas always said about the Star Wars movies that they're about Anakin Skywalker, but with the prequel trilogy, we spent so much time on other people other than Anakin Skywalker that when we see his transition from this innocent little slave boy to this Dark Lord of the Sith, it feels rushed and out of nowhere, and we have no idea where it came from. It's just so random. So yes, I could complain forever about the prequel trilogy, especially Jar Jar, who I didn't mention up until now, but I'm not going to do that. I'm actually going to talk about what the prequel trilogy did right in my article companion for this week in the Woodward. So check that out if you're really interested in hearing me talk about what the prequel trilogy has on the positive side. But until January, that's going to be it for this season's episodes of On Screen. If you guys have any ideas for future topics that you want me to cover when I come back from break, please post them in the comments, or you can even shoot them at me in an email. My email is dwight@m.marywood.edu. I would love to hear you guys want me to talk about in the new season of On Screen. So until next time, take care.